Hey everybody, this is Perch. How you doing? I hope you're. I hope I. That was a very friendly entrance, I guess. I hope you're doing well. Anyway, here's a question about comics and manga, and it's a good question. It's one that I think people skip over. It says, "Hello." That's always a nice way to start a letter. My question: Are comics really overpriced compared to manga? What are the profit margins of both in the US? For example, how much does the whole operation cost the comic and manga publisher, from paper to buying the rights to the IP to shipping costs and all? And does the profits of each indicate that one of them is more greedy or less greedy than the other, etc.? Well, that's a more complicated question, but we can get to both of these. Anyway, there's a little bit more. It says, and why US manga never have certain things like dust covers, which Japanese manga always do, not always, and even French, or other manga do, and do they do that on purpose to avoid extra costs? The short answer is yes, but there's another reason too. And gain more profit, or is it they can't afford it? Um, Also, they don't have these promotional ad card things attached to the volumes? They're called obus. Yes, hope you know what I'm talking about. I'll explain that too in a moment. Well, we can explain it now. So when you buy a lot of books and manga in Japan, they often come with inserts or cards or little ad sheets, obus, and they're pretty common. I think in I don't know if the Shonen Jump would have anything like that, but the Tankobon volumes always do for sure. Anyway, sorry, continuing. These can be helpful to promote other manga or as a paid ad for something and use revenue from those paid ads to either make the book quality better or to cut a little bit from the price of the manga. That sounds like the smart thing to do. You don't have to go all the way and you can test it and see how it works. Well, that's it. Thank you. That was a very, very polite mail. So first of all, kind of taking each question in turn. So, yes, manga is cheaper in the US to the consumer than comics. And the example would be, by just pure volume, if you're looking at kind of apples to apples comparison, if a comic is 22 pages, 4.99 or 3.99, many Tankobon volumes are clocking in at anywhere from 6.99 to 7.99, sometimes up to $12, but many of them are in that $8 range. But one of the bigger, and that tankobon generally has 256 plus pages. Now it's not colored, so there's a difference there, and it's a smaller format than a comic book. So you slight differences. But putting all those together, yeah, manga is decidedly a better value for the dollar. If you're comparing graphic novels to manga, which is probably a slightly more fair comparison because then at least you're similar in terms of page and story and collection and so on. Then most graphic novels are clocking in at $12 to $16, sometimes $18. Again compared to 7 or 8. But the other factor there that comes in that I think a lot of people misunderstand is that Viz and some of the other big manga distributors here in the U.S. have pushed to get their manga out into Barnes and Noble and Target and Walmart and places like that. And the net effect is not only do you get a very relatively cheap cover price, which is often made cheaper by driving volume, but the other factor you get is that you get to then piggyback on the discounts that are going on inside those particular stores. So, Walmart will offer regularly a 25% discount on those items. Same thing with Target. Barnes and Noble has their either 10 or 20% membership program that they can throw in, and they put discounts on top of that. It's not uncommon. I was at a Barnes and Noble a couple of weeks ago, and they had most of the manga on sale 40%. Now, you might say to yourself, why in the world would, if manga's selling real well, why does it need to go on sale? And the answer is, it doesn't need to go on sale, but it drives volume. It drives volume pretty successfully. And when you're driving volume, then you're driving more sales, and particularly things that are serialized, you get more discounts. It just all in all, it clocks up over time. So that's a big factor, be there. Now, in terms of the profit margin, the reality is, and this is one of those areas while people are waving the flag for how wonderful manga is and everything else. If you're a mangaka in Japan producing this stuff, you are not living a great life. Typically your pay is going to be less than, comic artists here in the US. We've talked about how dismal that pay is. Your pay sucks. No doubt about it. Most mangaka are living in, for all intents and purposes, poverty. Or, they're people are roommates and other things. I mean, it's not great. Now, if you can, it's a lit, but it there. My mind wants to go several places at once. First off, I think that the standard of living or what people can expect in Japan, it's just, I don't know the best way to describe it. It's just culturally slightly different. There is I guess there's a slightly higher, not appreciation, but acceptance that if you're doing something you love and you're truly happy with it, you don't need to be making massive amounts of money, and you're willing to put up with a decent amount of poverty if you're doing something that you really love. Now, that's not exactly accurate what I just said, but it's closer. I mean, and it's more accurate when you compare it to the U.S. So I don't know if it's acceptance, because I don't think people are happy necessarily, but there is certainly more of a kind of a nuanced position here where people who are doing manga work are more understanding of the fact they're making less money. Again, doesn't mean they're happy about it, but it is a factor. Now, if you're a successful manga creator, then certainly you wind up doing quite well and you make money. But most manga creators are not successful. The majority of manga never even gets translated overseas, let alone is successful in Japan. So on top of that, what happens is the manga's coming over here. It's getting distributed in this case by a number of different companies. But take Viz for example. Viz is getting it localized, and then they're getting it printed and put out. It's a different business than the U.S. comic market, and this is a really important thing to think about. The manga that you're reading, if you live in the U.S., was not created here, and it wasn't even created before it became the volume in your hands. It was created in Japanese for that format, and then it was localized, translated, bound, put together, and distributed. So the operation in the U.S. of taking that work and redistributing it here is vastly different than the work it takes for, say, Marvel or DC to produce a comic. It's a whole different group of people that are involved in creating that a package. And so it's really important that you kind of keep that in mind, because in that way the businesses are not the same. And if you're comparing kind of Viz's profit margin to, say, Marvel's, well, I mean, one's a redistributor, one's taking things and they're it's more similar to maybe paper cut, but and the other is actually producing new content, meaning Marvel and DC. And so there is a very different business model in play for both. And it's important to kind of keep that in mind. As for the last question, why don't they put the little paper slips advertising in? Well, I think, first off, it would drive a little bit extra cost. The idea of putting a loose leaf thing in for many, many reasons has been a struggle in the U.S. They've largely discounted that practice and they kind of steer people away from it. But it is successful, and I do think in terms of gaining some advertising revenue, it wouldn't be a bad idea. I'm sure you could advertise other comics, but if you had a little paper insert with a QR code or some way to promote things, I mean, you could sell that as advertising space. It would certainly pay for not only the ad but a little bit more, and you could use it to drive down the cost of the comic. So they absolutely should do more of that, and it has proven to be mildly successful, and I don't know. That's just one of those areas where I don't think the comic book companies, the publishers in the U.S., are really pursuing much in terms of advertising. I think that there was this kind of shared belief that it couldn't help, wasn't going to be useful, moving on, and so that's just kind of what they did, and it hasn't been great for them, I would say. Anyway, great question. It's comparing manga and the U.S. comics. There are a lot of fair comparisons, and there's a lot of dodginess to the whole argument. It's very, very easy to quickly state things like, well, manga's doing so much better than Western comics, and it is profit margin, but understanding kind of why it is and what some of the factors are that make the job easier or harder, I think it's helpful. I think it changes the picture a little bit, and it overall creates a better, kind of a more well-rounded look at what's going on. Anyway, There you go. So thank you very much. Very, very nice mail. I appreciate everybody who writes into the show. You certainly can. Look at the description to the video. You will see everything you need. And hey, like the video, subscribe is very good, and pass this along to others. Why not? You know, give a recommendation out to a friend. Would very much appreciate it. And yeah, I guess that's about it. I got nothing else to shill. So thank you very much, and thanks for listening.